Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Shallow End. I'm Dave Schwartz, and lately I've been thinking a lot about the value, and sometimes lack of value, in having your, quote, collecting lane. Certainly we can tick off a list of benefits, but sometimes I wonder whether having your lane or lanes is all it's cracked up to be. Can it be too constrictive or restrictive? This, collecting sports cards, is supposed to be fun, after all, is it not? And is there a tipping point with the amount of rules we place on ourselves where it suddenly becomes less fun? It's worth asking. To help talk through this question, today we welcome back Pat, known on IG as Insta Account Haver. And we go deep into the subject of collecting lanes, when to stay in yours, and when it might be more fun to stray. Thanks for listening. Let's get started. You might recognize this guest. He is Pat. He has Insta Account Haver on Instagram, and he was just on about 5 or 6 weeks ago. But it felt like we had some unfinished business. Like we hit pause on a conversation rather than finishing one. So Pat, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I'm very relieved that I didn't completely sink your podcast and your listenership with my first appearance. So I'm happy to be here again. Hopefully I have something of substance to share. So yeah, thanks.
I've been really curious about and interested in and impressed by some of the cards that you've been posting lately. And one thing that I've noticed is that it's really diverse in what you're posting. At one moment, it can be a card of William the Refrigerator Perry from the mid-'80s Chicago Bears. Then it's a vintage card of Chief Bender, pre-war even, right? Then it's a 2022 black chrome refractor of Bobby Witt. Pat, what is going on, and why are you so unhappy with this hobby that you don't have just one lane?
Undiagnosed mental illness. I have no idea. I think that this episode, I hope this isn't going to be a thing where it ends up being an intervention where Vlad Guerrero Sr. and David Robinson and Fred Taylor, all my PC guys walk in and they're like, what's the deal with these tobacco cards that you're buying? Aren't we good enough? But no, I mean, I find it it's very weird to collect without a lane. It's strange. I mean, I guess there are lanes, and I would be interested to hear from you and your perspectives, because I mean, you recently have stepped off one of the lanes of your collecting that really defines you, the Brian Jordan stuff. So I think the idea of us being collectors, how we create those constraints, because there's just an endless amount of stuff that you can collect, and there's a lot of cool stuff that you can collect, and there's so much availability of things you can collect, where how we set the parameters of what we are. I think that's a really interesting sort of way of, I mean, I have no advice. I have no idea of how to approach it. My collecting approach is very much a puppy on a walk, where it's just like, stick, ooh, hydrant, oh, my foot, oh, the stick, oh, these ants. Like I'm a bit all over the place, and I don't know if it's necessarily the most constructive way of approaching things, but I'm happy to have a discussion about this.
But it's a fun way of doing it, and I have a love-hate relationship with lanes. You know, on one hand, I do the same thing, the squirrel sort of thing, where I go off and, for example, about a month ago, I thought, why can't I collect unlicensed gold Prism Panini baseball cards? And then last week I thought, why did I buy those unlicensed Panini Gold Prism baseball cards? But there was a moment that I had where I thought, they're really beautiful cards. I mean, and yes, they don't have the logo, but why am I so concerned that the MLBPA gets its money? You know, and as long as the picture is taken in a way that the logo is covered up and it's not too intrusive. Sometimes they do a really nice job with it. It can be a really nice one. But I do the same sort of thing where I weave in and out of different things. And you brought up my Brian Jordan collection. I didn't so much end the lane as it is I narrowed it. because I held on to enough Brian Jordan cards that I still have a full page in my binder and it's the first page of my binder is Brian Jordan. So it's still there. It's more like instead of having one wide 50-foot lane, I then narrowed it so I could have other lanes going next to it and kind of weave in between them all, because I don't want to limit myself. I'm a baseball card collector mostly, but I like vintage stuff. I like 80s stuff. I like modern stuff. For me, anyway, the hobby is just a little bit less fun when I put too many rules in place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I have a really great admiration for collectors that are extremely focused, right? Whether it be somebody that's really into collecting a particular set or a team or a player and go into it with a great deal of depth, right? I mean, it's important to have constraints. I mean, in any sort of pursuit, constraints are really important because it ends up being chaos. Like there's no such thing as creativity without constraints, right? Because it sets the mission, it sets the question, it sets the purpose of what you're doing. And likewise with collecting, we all have constraints on what we do and do not collect. And some people just are all over the map. And it's really interesting to see people that have those collections. I mean, I got in a fit of procrastination, I went on the website for the Metropolitan Museum, and I went on to Jefferson Burdick's collection that the Met has. And we know him as the almost like the Linnaean, created the Linnaean taxonomy of pre-war cards, you know, the E's, the T's, all those. But looking at his collection, he had some just like crazy range. He was almost borderline a hoarder, where he had cards with cars on them and planes, and he had football cards, and he had everything. And I always really enjoy seeing people that just let their freak flag fly, and they have all sorts of different, you know, bits and bobs that they collect. It's almost like a bowerbird, you know, or you say the thing with the squirrel, like the bowerbirds that just collect everything that are, you know, they have rules where they collect like things that are blue, but they build their little house and they, you know, display their blue things to mates or whomever. I really like people that have wide ranging collections, but I also have a great respect for the people that go deep. And it's interesting how people can go deep and they can accumulate this just rich knowledge across the eras. Like there's Marino Collector, for example,
so
where
great.
Yeah, I mean, Marino's professional card career starts in 1984, and he has gone from 1984 all the way to the current, post playing days, all sorts of different eras of cards, from junk wax to the 90s serial numbered to you know, the current refractor panini sort of stuff. He goes into promo cards, he goes into to phone cards, he goes into prototypes, all sorts of things like that. And one of the things that the assumption that people have is that, oh, if you focus on one particular player, you can't go into any degree of depth, right? You just have this catalog of these cards, right? But if you pick the right player, and if you have the right degree of diligence, you could just spend eras and have this really great, rich knowledge of the progression of the hobby and the progression of the genre through just the particular lens of this one player. Or Greg, Tim Salmon Collector, you had him on one of your previous episodes. I think it was the 27 Decisions. And he, you know, on your episode with him, he talked about a Barry Sanders card, right? The Barry Sanders Precious Metal Gems. But he kind of understood 90s inserts and has this like incredible encyclopedic knowledge of them through collecting Tim Salmon. And I kind of wish I had that degree of connection to a particular player. I just, the players that I really like, it's tough because I don't really like post playing days cards. And, you know, like, for example, for me, like Ronnie Lott, right? There's a limitation to what Ronnie Lott has outside of those amazing like pro line cards where he's wearing this sweater and he's there with his wife, and you know, all those weird pro set cards which are the public service announcement things. There isn't like a great deal of range that's there. So I just end up hopping all around the board when it comes to collecting for myself. But it tends to be a bit messy, and it doesn't keep you disciplined. That's one of the problems that kind of comes out of that.
And do we have to be disciplined to some degree? Absolutely, yes. Because having some sort of focus, having lanes, keeps us from spending money wildly and foolishly to whatever extent that would cross that line, right? There are certain purposes for doing it. Sometimes it could be personal, where I am this sort of collector, right? And that's how you get known. And I brought this up with Carlson Cards several months ago. This idea of when people name themselves, I think the example we used was Ray Lewis Collector 25. But what happens when he bumps up against Ravens Collector 4? And all of a sudden, a Ray Lewis card pops up, and it's a Star Rubies out of 50 or 100, whatever they're numbered out of. And they both want it. And Ravens Collector goes a little higher and gets it. What does it mean for the identity of Ray Lewis Collector 25 when he doesn't get the Ray Lewis card?
Mm-hmm.
Then, does he cease to be his own avatar in a sense? And then we get to the whole idea of then that's what starts driving up prices, because you have to get the card and you start bidding and you start going higher and higher.
Yeah.
It's interesting to.
Oh yeah, no, and there's, I mean, with certain folks that are like with someone like a Ray Lewis or a Peyton Manning or a Barry Bonds or someone like that, there's a lot of people that collect those athletes, right? There's a lot of people that collect those because so many people are drawn to them. I one person that I really like seeing what they do is Ray Langford collector. I mean, I don't know how many Ray Langford collectors there are. Ray Langford was a fantastic ball player. I loved watching him. But, there's certain players that have really long careers that folks can get into that, I don't think that there's that degree of competitiveness. But that's one thing that's very interesting about collecting, whether it's set collecting, the people that are really into set registry or really into particular players or into particular parallels and accumulating as many or the best of those particular parallels, where there is a competitive side to collecting. I talked to Chris Hoge, and that was one thing that kind of came up where we were thinking about it. And in the sense that I'm not a very competitive person in life, but there is a sort of approach where when you collect, there is an idea where you accumulate the best of a collection, or to accumulate whether it's a super collector that collects everything or somebody that wants to collect the best cards of this array of athletes or this particular athletes or this particular parallel. I mean, there is that mentality that exists that does create that lane. And I could totally understand where people are coming from with it, but it seems so intense to me. I don't know. It seems, very, very intense. And as somebody that's a very not intense person, that's just a big old goofball. Like that's something that I find to be really fascinating about collecting cards is the people that see it as, okay, I'm in this competition to construct the best PSA registry set of 1972 Topps baseball or something like that. It's yeah, I mean, there is that degree of a lane that I can see the craft of that, but I don't know if I have the fortitude for that sort of thing.
I don't want to have the fortitude for something like that. That was one reason I gave up the Brian Jordan collection, and I got a couple notes saying, this is probably the best Brian Jordan collection in the world. Maybe the only one, but I didn't care. It's not the reason that I got into collecting cards. I started like, look, I have the best collection of X. There have been times where I've thought about collecting a certain player, and then I see what the environment around that player is. I think, oh, I don't even want to get involved with that. I'm a historian, so it probably goes against the collecting, the competition side of things. I understand that people are competitive. I am really competitive when I'm competing in something that I think deserves competition. And for me, cards is not it. What you brought up with Marino Collector, I love his collection. And, there's another rule of, don't collect post-playing day cards. Well, he swept that one under the rug. He's like, I don't need that, right? Because if he did, then he would basically have stopped collecting around 98, 99, whenever it was that Marino's career finally gave out. but he almost needed to tweak other sort of common rules, right, of the hobby in order to enjoy his lane in a sense. So I think I am pro lane. This is not an anti or pro lane episode, but rather just a chance for us to talk through why they're there. Do they need to be there in all cases? And what are they for? Because I think sometimes lanes are external and they're functional and they're pragmatic. It's like it helps me budget money in certain ways. So I spend X here, but not X over there. Or I need certain things to make sense for me when I hold my cards next to each other. But other times I do think it's internal. There's a motivation to get reactions, to get affirmation. And there's no one reason. I'm sure this it's a giant overlapping Venn diagram sort of thing about why people do things, and they're all completely valid. But it is, I think, a discussion worth having. This whole
Yeah.
idea of do we need lanes, and I think yes, we do, but why is the question.
Well, I think one thing is okay, I'm just going to put on the academic hat right now. So just if you have the little siren for nerd alert, you could just sound it right now, like just straight up nerd alert. Okay. So you just dropped the fact that you're a historian. I am an organizational theorist, right? Which sounds about as cool as it does. But one of the things that's a really strong line of inquiry within it is the idea of the difference between having a generalist identity and a specialist identity or a focused identity. Is the idea of being a jack of all trades and a master of none a reality, right? Is it better to have this general sort of set of identities or a hybrid identity where you are, like me, I consider myself a repacker, breaker, sports card investor, father, martial artist, goat grill, accumulator. That's kind of what I see myself as. But the idea is that, like, is it better to have this sort of robust identity or to have a focused identity? And there was a really interesting sort of set of studies that come about with it, because what you do, kind of the genre of collector that you are, it's not just like what you collect or the attributes of the things that you collect. There is a social world around it, right? There's networks of people that are also part of that grouping of individuals that collect a certain player or collect a certain era or collect a certain brand, whether it's Prism or Finest, or a particular parallel with there. You have this sort of group of individuals that are there, and it's helpful on a functional level because, first of all, you can share knowledge amongst each other, have these intense sort of things that you can build these bonds with each other about. And if you are a team collector, for example, you will have your group chat, you will have your group, you will be able to exchange information about where to find particular cards, or somebody upgraded from a PSA 8 of a particular card to a PSA 9. They want to sell that PSA 8. So there is that sort of functional social world that's there. And there's also like that set of knowledge that comes about, where the difference between how you understand cards, if you are a vintage collector versus a 90s collector versus an ultra modern collector, like what are the sets? What are the sort of like ways in which we judge quality, the bases of knowledge? If you kind of go into all of those boats, it's really tough to have the bandwidth to cover all that sort of thing. But if you go in with, a particular era or a particular team or something like that, you can get everything down pretty easily. And then also how you kind of explain yourself as a collector, where it's like, explain yourself to other people, where, there's that sort of idea where somebody says, okay, I'm really into punk music, versus you get a sense of who they are. You get a sense of what they listen to. But if somebody says, I listen to a little bit of this and a little bit of that, I have this omnivorous taste, I just enjoy classical music, but I also enjoy, grindcore or something like that. It's interesting where it's like when somebody has a clear sort of specialist identity, you understand what they collect and you can have better conversations with them, or you can people can find their grouping of individuals that collect the same thing as they do. And it makes it more fun when you have people that collect relatively the same things that you do. So in organizational theory, There's a sociologist by the name of Ezra Zuckerman, who's at the business school at MIT Sloan, and he found that kind of the general idea is that he was looking at careers, how people progress within careers, and he was looking at actors and actresses. And what he found was that early on in your career, if you're an actor or an actress, it's good to have a particular focused type that you are, right? You stick to a genre, or you stick to, in his case, he was looking at genre, you stick to a genre. But later on in your career, right, it's better to kind of branch out and become a generalist. And I think with collecting, when you're going through that process of learning or building bonds with people, or if you want to be more outward facing, developing your persona or your image on Instagram or whatever you decide to do, having that focused identity is really helpful. And then branching out and kind of saying, okay, I get into these other things based upon, I'm kind of set and I have my foundation. Now I can kind of look and see and grab all these other things. Because I mean, we bring up Marino Collector, he collects a lot of different stuff. And, it's really helpful for him to use his knowledge that he's accumulated collecting Marino in collecting Deadpool cards, right? Or you had Venezuelan League stickers on a previous episode, right? He collects, Venezuelan tops, but he also collects, the shiny stuff. And those things probably inform each other in a really meaningful way. But you always have that sort of base of knowledge of, this is my main jam, and I know the people that are in the same jam as I am, that vibe on the same things. And if I'm looking for a card, or if I want to have a conversation about a particular thing that is really like super esoteric, I have that person right there, as opposed to somebody who's all over the place. It's really tough to develop those things. It takes a lot of time, and it makes it very difficult to build that sort of network, or that sort of social world, or that bases of knowledge that can really allow you to kind of thrive when it comes to your collection, and do the things that you want to do, and find the cards that you want to find, or build the bonds that you want to build.
And so to follow up a little bit, to dig a little deeper on this, in your understanding of this field and this discipline, when someone does start to narrow, and you mentioned there are some social benefits, is there any research or any evidence that shows that they are doing it intentionally versus unintentionally? Like, is there something that they're seeking?
I think it probably happens both ways. I mean, in the case of actors and actresses, right? Or, even when you advise your students, right, when they're leaving university, you probably kind of emphasize where it's like, okay, find the thing that you're good at, have a way in which you can communicate yourself to the outside world when you're looking for a job. I think that there is a sort of thing about the environment that for people to understand things, it's good to stick to these particular categories sometimes, right? It makes things easier to understand. And I think that probably, I mean, I don't know, amongst actors and actresses, I probably, a lot of them, they do feel frustrated, that they feel constrained, and there's these external forces that are there. I think as collectors, we have a lot more agency than people that are pursuing a particular line of work, right? We kind of go into this in a way that's a lot more deliberate. At least I like to think so. I don't know. I can only speak of from like a sample size of one to, whomever else I talk to, where, we kind of decide these things, based on our own volition, what makes sense to us, what our sort of motivations are. I don't know.
I would think too that some of it has to go toward goals. And to bring it back to collectors, there are, just off the top of my head, 3 goals that come to mind when you are firmly entrenched in the hobby, or getting to know the hobby a little bit, and you're trying to get deeper. One of those would be social connections, where, you mentioned having the group chats where, you are a Chicago Bulls collector, and you get into a group chat with lots of other Chicago Bulls collector, and you sometimes hear this thing of like, oh, some of my best friends now are people in this Bulls chat, and I haven't even met them yet. Then another goal could be competition. Whatever I do, I want to be the best at something. I'm going to be the best Jordan collector. I'm going to be the best Luka collector. I'm going to be the best Ovechkin collector, whoever it happens to be. And so your goal is to achieve, to climb to a certain level, to be recognized for that. A third one would be bringing it back to this idea of curation and memory and remembrance, some nostalgia. We are trying to put something together that is, in some ways, is an external hard drive representation of yourself. Maybe you're not known, but people see this collection and they think of you when they see this. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but you don't necessarily have to be one to see that people are in this hobby space for very different reasons. And that might be just another way that lanes help us get toward what our goals are, no matter what they are.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can say, I always find the idea of the description of lanes to be interesting as opposed to, categories, right? Or genres or something like that. I think that we can kind of get into the semantics of it, but you'll lose listeners if we do. I think, and I'll just sound like a pedantic yutz. But I think that one of the things that's very interesting about that is, I do find it to be, as somebody that listens to or someone talking or sees the collections that they have. I mean, if someone's like a very hyper focused like team collector, for example, it could be a situation where either I completely dislike the team or I couldn't care less about the team, but I'm just fascinated to hear them talk about their collection of Chicago Bulls cards or something like that. Or if somebody's into a particular player, if somebody walked up and said, "Hey, I am the number one Jose Oquendo collector," I would love to hear about that. Like, why are you collecting Jose Oquendo? But like, why do you, not year wise, but the date, why are you drawn to Jose Oquendo or even you with Willie McGee? I mean, I know Willie McGee was a really, really, really good player. Definitely a solid Hall of Very Good player. And I love Hall of Very Good players in all sports. But I want to know more if somebody is a Willie McGee collector. What got you into Willie McGee? Why did you, what drew you to him as a kid, right? Or what drew you to him later on in your life? Or let me see all the different cards, because I didn't know Willie McGee had a ton of cool cards, right? There is something very inviting about that, hearing that sort of thing. Versus, I maybe I'm being self-effacing. You bring up the fact at the beginning of the episode, I collect things all over the place, right? I mean, I have my lanes. I stick to sports. I don't collect hockey, which makes me very lonely here in Canada. I, don't necessarily, I'm not drawn to napkin patches, all that sort of elitist stuff that we kind of go for as collectors, true collectors. But I think that when I post a bunch of cards, it makes sense to me because I'm in my own head about, okay, when I was a kid, I was really into tobacco cards. I would collect all those like Dover reprints. I collected cards, and the story that I was on last time about the Fridge Perry card, like that card was attached to a very vivid memory I had as a kid, and also a lost moment in card collecting where that was the absolute hot card. And if my dad sold it for $300, he could have bought like a dozen 86 Jordans at that time, right? That's how like massive that card was. And then, I really like Vlad Guerrero and I really like David Robinson, and I'm a Jacksonville Jaguars fan. So I got Fred Taylor because it's really tough to find Tony Baselli cards and really tough to find John Henderson or Marcus Stroud cards. It makes sense to me. But to other people, it's just like a mess. It's just all over the place. And it's hard for me because, and this might get into something that makes it easier when you have a lane or a genre that you collect within, or constraints that are, these jersey barriers that are really strong. There are so many awesome cards, and it's very easy to say, ooh, that one is so much cooler than this other one that I got a month ago. And I have the convenience of buying it, and I have the convenience of sending it to consignment. Oh, that's awesome, right? It's almost like being locked it's almost like the fantasy of being locked in the toy store overnight and getting to play with all the toys, right? And having that, however your finances can constrain that, and that's a completely different issue. But like, if you're at this particular level, if you cap it at $20, there's still a universe of awesome cards in all sorts of types. And I think having that lane creates that stability where you're not stuck in that endless cycle of buy this because it's incrementally cooler, and then I have to go to the post office and send this off to consignment or post it online. And it does allow you, when you have a lane, to enjoy things a little bit more, right? It's almost so you get a chance to realize what you got, because there are those that sort of set boundaries to what you do. The boundaries can be really helpful.
I think, yes, to appreciate your lane, you first have to leave your lane. I'm thinking of I'm thinking of the allegory of the cave, right? Where, if you stay in your spot, you don't know what you're missing. You don't know what's necessarily out there. In a lot of ways, it contradicts the cave, where sometimes you might get out there and you just want to return to the cave. You want to have your body reinserted into the matrix. You don't want to know what the truth is when you get out there necessarily. Yeah. But I'm thinking of there is real value to dipping your toe into a different lane for a while to see if maybe you want to move into a different, to use your phrasing, different category or a different genre. I try not to do this too much, but I feel like it's like the fourth time I've done it in this conversation where I'm turning it back to me, where I've said before that I think hockey cards are the most beautiful modern cards. I don't know the players if they don't play for the St. Louis Blues. I don't know who's doing well in the standings, but I know those cards look amazing. So part of me thinks there's some value to finding a $7, $8 card in hockey that I think just looks cool. Buying it, seeing what it feels like in my hand, what it looks like when it's right in front of me, not on a COMC or an eBay screen. And I might get it and think, well, boy, I just could have bought a Jimmy John sandwich for this test to see if I really needed this card. And in which case, I get back to where I am, and then at least I tried. And who is it that says? I forget who said this recently. I've heard it off and on over the last several years, but someone said it again recently. If you want to try something new, do it, but do it at a level that is, even if it's a player you don't even want, you don't even like, just see if you can tolerate the card. Go on COMC, spend $10 or less and get it, then accelerate someplace big. Because I think that we don't want to restrict ourselves too much or take this hobby necessarily too seriously, unless it's your business, in which case it's not a hobby. But that being said, I think we should encourage ourselves to try something new just to see if we like it. But I don't think that's exactly what you're saying. I don't think you're saying you should just kind of stay in your lane and never tread outward. I think I might have pivoted us a little bit to this idea of it pays to learn something new and to explore something new within the card space.
Yeah, well, I mean, I totally get your point about hockey cards. I mean, granted, Upper Deck's cards do not feature horseradish mayo like Jimmy John sandwiches do, which is a big minus. But one of the things about hockey cards that is helpful for me is my son, who does not watch hockey whatsoever, is a huge Vancouver Canucks fan. And I can get, and he doesn't care about, he could name one player, maybe two players on the Canucks currently. In his mind, like Roberto Luongo still plays for them, but he's ambivalent to what player it is. So he'll go to the card show with me and he will find the shiniest card or the card with the little piece of jersey in there. And the thing that's cool about hockey cards is that they're game worn jerseys typically in a lot of Upper Deck ones. So he'll get them and he'll be like, gosh, they wore them in a game, and he'll touch the jersey and get really into it because he's like, oh, real hockey player wear this. And I'm like, yeah. No napkins, kid. But he doesn't care about the player. I mean, these are like also ran cards. These are cast off cards to the people at the card show. And he's a little kid, and they're like, oh, I'll cut you a deal. And, and he'll get his cards and he'll take them home and he'll set him up in his little, like, in his little tin or his little binder. He's getting way too into binders, or his little shrine that he has. And that's hockey cards for me. So I can kind of see him, I can become acquainted with hockey cards. And if I decide to buy him something, I can have us do the little research, be like, okay, this is like a cool set. Okay, the cup or what have you. But I think one of the things that I thought you were going to go to with going back to your Brian Jordan collection is that you went on, and maybe this gets, okay, this is going to get really artsy fartsy right here. This is going to be like, this could be very cringe. Bear with me. You went on this journey of collecting Brian Jordan, right? You got to know Brian Jordan, the two-sport athlete, the play, all the things that he accomplished. You collected all these cards of these different sets, all the 90s parallels, whether it's the platinum medallions or the essential credentials, or
it was my Brian Jordan was my bachelor's degree in 90s cards. 100%.
Exactly, right. And you just decided, I'm not going to double major in Crusades, right? But I guess that's honors, right? I guess maybe getting a Crusade Red is like summa cum laude. I don't know. But the thing was that you went on this journey, and the ones that you keep are almost like the scrapbook that you took from the vacation, if that makes sense, where you have this thing where you go on the vacation, you have all these experiences, and they're end up being somewhat ephemeral, right? They're temporary. But when you come out of it, you have this collection of cards that are like really meaningful to you. They're the ones that mean the most to you from this journey, and that you can look back on it and see, okay, I went through this and I found the 9 memories that I want to keep, right? Or the 9, objects that will be in my journey that I took, my hobby journey that I took with Brian Jordan, as you go on to whether, what your next thing is, whether it's collecting, okay, I want to go more towards collecting vintage, or I want to go more towards collecting, Prism Gold unlicensed baseball or something like that. Or even if you decide to jump, like, oh, maybe I will get more into hockey cards, and maybe I will get into something else. Where I think the thing that's kind of neat, and to go back to that sort of specialist going to generalist sort of direction, you have that knowledge that you've developed that maybe doesn't translate over, but it does have that basic sort of understanding. Like maybe some of the principles are translate over, like they're portable. But also, one thing that's kind of neat is that you have your core group. I don't know if you had a Brian Jordan group chat or something like that, but you shake your head now. But you have like that group of individuals that you bonded with over that aspect or that lane of collecting, that, of 90s inserts. And you have a like social basis. And those people know people, right? That's like, okay, there's also the people that are these hybrids that like, yeah, I'm really into, I'm really into 90s inserts, but this other person is into 90s inserts through the St. Louis Cardinals or something like that. And so it does kind of provide that basis where, even if you go to a show or you go to the National or something like that, like you have your people, and that does make it kind of cool.
So as we do start to wind down here, I really love where you've taken this conversation and this thought of the generalist versus the specialist. And we started the conversation by talking about your own collection. You've posted some really, I was teasing before, but you posted some really beautiful cards that range over the course of a century. When you look at your own collection, like how do you feel about where it's going? What are you appreciating, and maybe what goals do you have in the near and far future for it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think one of the things for me, just to get really navel gazy, is to, like, as I said before, one of the problems with kind of having a very wide lane or being all over the place kind of categorically is that there's always like that sort of sense to be like nomadic in a way, right? And kind of go from, oh, this is like, these are some greener pastures here that are slightly greener than the ones over there. And I want to spend a little bit more time with the things that I have and really I have my core cards where I think I'm like you, where and I think this is something that it's not like a constraint that I lock on myself. It's just that for the sake of minimalism, I max out at 5 cards for particular player, unless it's like Kevin Green or something like that, where Kevin Green is he's a Hall of Famer, but his cards are cheap, but they're really hard to find. But there's a thing where I usually lock in at 5 for a particular player. So for Vlad Guerrero Sr., Randy Moss, David Robinson, people like that, they're kind of locked in. But I think one of the things that's difficult for me is I just want to kind of slow down on the sense of, with eBay being the endless card store, that you could just say, all right, stop, just look at the things that I have, right? And be a little bit less promiscuous to a degree with the cards that are outside of like my core player PCs. But I've found some really cool things that just from hearing people talk, hearing people that have these really sort of focus lanes talk about the cards that they like. Like I've seen I've gotten a couple of Venezuelan Topps cards, a couple of Willie Mazes, and in time I'd like to build the run, but I don't have to right now. I've been really getting into Charles Bender cards, right? His pre-war cards, but I do it slow. I think that the idea for me, the goal is just to take things a lot slower. And I think that it allows you to be like, having that degree of control that you put on yourself can allow you to manage those like multiple lanes really well and switch over. It's like, when you treat it as if it's like tipping plates, that makes it a little bit harder. But when you just kind of sit down and set the service, it's like, oh, okay, these are all these cool things that I have. The one thing I do want to do is I want to, there's certain players that I really want to get a little bit more into, but do it in a way that, like, as you said, like, get the $7-8 cards. I've got a binder and I've been having fun like building that binder of cards. I mean, it's like a thing where for me, it's just like taking it more slow, because it's like, just because you can buy things and just because you can send it to a consignor or you can sell it on Facebook or you could do a story sale doesn't mean you have to, right? Where it's like, just because you can doesn't mean you have to. And I think that's kind of the way in which I'm looking to go with my collecting. But all those cards, I mean, it's fun because it's just like it's a fun little thing of hitting all these different levers of things that I really liked, from when I was a kid collecting to now. And yeah, it's really fun. Also, I want to get this fantastic repack that I'm doing off the ground. It's certified. Everything's a banger. All PSA 10s, and you'll see me at a local card show near you with my GoPro on my forehead.
Fantastic, Pat. Yeah. So much to think about. Thank you. Good luck with the repack. Arena Club, are you listening?
Yeah.
Are you listening? Yeah. Don't steal Pat's idea. All right. Thank you, Pat. Take care. We'll talk soon.